Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Hello, get ready to elevate your cannabis knowledge. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the C word, where we explore current affairs and culture. I am Hina, and today we have the pleasure of welcoming Breeder Steve to the podcast. A true pioneer in cannabis cultivation, Steve began his journey in the late 1980s, inspiring countless individuals to grow their own homegrown plants. Known for his remarkable cultivars developed from both indoor and outdoor populations, Steve has legendary status with his focus on hardiness and innovation. After 2 decades, Steve is coming back with exciting new releases that promise to revolutionize cannabis genetics. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to our guest, Breeder Steve. Hello.
Hello, Linda. Thanks for having me. I don't know if these first releases are going to revolutionize genetics, but we're going to get back on track and make some special things happen for sure. And the new things that we've just dropped are something that will put a lot of smiles on faces, I think. So happy to bring them out. Yeah.
I read a little bit about them on the forums about cannabis genetics. Could you let us know a little bit about that?
Well, there's quite a number of projects I've got going on right now that are, some of them have been going for a while, some of them are just getting started. So there's different focuses in different places for different types and things, so there's so many potential ways to go, and you really have to choose the direction for every line, what constitutes the ideal for you in that line, whether it's a specific taste that apes something perfectly, like this absolutely tastes like raspberry danishes or whatever, that's a worthy thing too. You can just pursue that, but you might be saying, I want one that's, super high in any compound, but particularly cannabinoid. You might say, I want a specific cannabinoid isolated and raised up so it's more efficient to extract or whatnot. So this way there's room for loads and loads of people to be involved in cannabis genetics because there's so many different avenues to pursue, and you've got to pick and choose a little bit. And you can't do everything everywhere. Some places are, suited to certain types and useless for other ones. So you don't go to the equator to work on breeding autos because it's already 12-12 there all the time. So you don't need something that flowers under midsummer sun in the high latitudes, like that's where you want to work on autos, is at the higher latitudes. So also humid places, you've got to grow plants that are acclimatized or evolved within humid climates, or use those in the crosses. So it's cold and wet out, and normally most cannabis that would grow at these latitudes would just rot in this weather because they're kind of big, chunky flowers. But I have some tropical cannabis still flowering in my backyard, but I keep it out of the rain. So it's not getting rained on at least, but it is very humid, wet, and cold out, let's say. But because that plant is evolved from the tropics, it's really not used to cold, it's used to humid. So if it's a lot of humidity, that's not the friend of typical hash plants, which might be more Kush types from Pakistan or Afghanistan that are more desert plants, or Lebanon or Morocco. These are dry environments, and they have a cold winter for processing hash. And so that's a nice thing to do, and it's higher latitudes is just think, hey, this is just best destined for hash. It's maybe too high a latitude to finish the flower really nicely, but you can still have fantastic hash because you're in that window of ripeness for the resin early on in the window of it. So when you sift it, it's very white because a lot of the glands are still very clear, not even milky, and definitely not amber as they would be if you left them longer. But the weather dictates the harvest time in this part of the world. As in most parts of the world, you've got to work around make hay while the sun shines, and you've got to get it in before it rains. And so it's, the sport and fun of outdoor growing is that you do have some unknowns, but you also have the elements freely at your disposal. You don't need to pay for fans. You don't need to pay for lights. It's just let the wind blow and the sun shine. And I don't mind if it rains all over them when they're in vegetative state. But once they're near the end of flower, rain is not their friend, So the last few weeks, you don't really have problem with rain and mold and cannabis until the last 2 weeks. That's when it counts, right? Fun stuff. A lot of people will be better off with a little closet and they'd maybe not have any yard plant in anyway. So everybody can grow their own, even on a balcony in a container. And I really love to encourage it because I think it helps to normalize cannabis, that people get the idea that, hey, it's just a plant, it's not some weird thing, it's really just a plant and they can appreciate it. Even if it doesn't turn out spectacularly, it's beautiful just to have decorative cannabis. To me, it's not fully normalized again until it's decorative cannabis, where you can just have it planted in public gardens and it's so ubiquitous that people wouldn't even bother stealing it, they just don't care anymore. Like you can't, once it's everywhere, you can't give it away. Nobody's in your yard coming to steal your oregano, It's the same thing. If it's so abundant that it's worthless, most of the problems associated with it evaporate. Prohibition's what keeps it expensive, which is what attracts, the criminal element will always be there when you create the black market. The only way to get rid of a black market, economically speaking, is don't prohibit something or don't overtax it. Because if it's overtaxed, there'll be a black market. If it's prohibited, there'll be a black market. It's inevitable. And with the black market comes the violence and problems. And then they associate that sort of unfairly with the substance. It's not the substance causing the problems. It's the fact that it's a cash business, and people are carrying large sums of money in the transactions. And that's what really drives the unfortunate parts of the industry, And once they've normalized it or depenalized it, they don't have to create a phone book full of regulations. They just have to return to the day before they unfairly prohibited it, Once they just revoke the prohibition, then people could pick and choose which producers are trustworthy and the best. When they go to their chemist maybe vets the suppliers. They could just buy it. But also, if they want to buy it at a farmer's market from Rasta Bob, they can go to the farmer's market and buy it too. I mean, that's a personal choice. But they say, untested weed is such a danger. It's not really. It's possible that there's bad things added, that people use fungicides and pesticides and stuff like that. But again, if there's an open market, there will be companies that say, hey, we pay for third-party testing, our stuff is verified clean, and you can choose to buy that, And if you want to totally get boy in the bubble grade, that's, absolutely got ultra low CFUs of microbiological contaminants. The CFUs are the colony forming units. I think the cutoff in Canada was 50,000 a gram under the Cannabis Act originally, which is pretty tight. So a lot of the cannabis would get irradiated so that the mold and stuff wouldn't grow. It wouldn't if there was mildew in that bud, it wouldn't get rid of it. It just kill it, with radiation. What passes for clean legal weed isn't necessarily always the herb you want. It's just kind of like Dusty Mids is being kind, So if you want to have really sticky, fresh herb, you can't wait for it to pass through the system and expect to make it to you in the same quality it was released necessarily, especially in an overbearing regulatory regime where it's got to be passed around a lot and it can't be sold directly. So once the growers can sell directly, the quality won't suffer as much as if it has to go to a central provincial warehouse where then it's redistributed to shops and then people pick it up or have it delivered or whatnot. So it might be in transit for a while. Well, the paperwork's done to release it from the producer to the provincial warehouse. And so Canada's kind of a convoluted way of getting it out there. And the government's the only ones doing well with the industry here. Most of the companies big, large and small, are struggling, really, really struggling. And many of them have gone bankrupt. I think it was like really a lot of like the national bankruptcies were categorized as coming from the cannabis industry, a disproportionate number compared to any other industry.
Is there a link between that and also the use of synthetic cannabis that they're
Well,
using in
yeah,
clinical
big part,
trials?
absolutely, because when you prohibit what people want, the criminal element will move in to fill the void, and they'll use whatever's at their disposal, and they'll be cheap synthetics, and they'll just say, hey, we could spray this on. People really want proper cannabis, but we'll just spray this on as kind of, it's nothing to do with cannabis, the synthetics that they spray on these products. So it's really sad to see what they call synthetic cannabis. It really isn't cannabis. It's not even synthetic cannabis. It's just not cannabis. It makes me ill when I think about it. But it's kind of a fear-mongering thing that goes along with they're trying to make it look like cannabis is the problem. It's not. It's the prohibition of cannabis is the problem. Like, people can huff gasoline. You can get absolutely ripped huffing gasoline. It's not good for you, but they're never going to make gasoline illegal. Nobody's saying huffing gasoline helps them with their cancer treatments or helps them with their glaucoma or helps them get a good sleep or a host of other things that, this benevolent herb that people have sought relief in and pleasure and inspiration and all kinds of many, many uses. But they're never going to stop you buying a liter of gasoline and huffing it. They can't. They can never do it. You know what I mean? So why? Why even try? They would demonize this useful herb, and that's simply because it is a useful herb, and they would rather sell the competitive products. There's all kinds of industries with a vested interest in prohibition. And you know what? When kids can't get some pot gummies in their community, they will turn to huffing gasoline. So the harm reduction thing has a lot to say too. They will find a way to get a buzz, whether it's sniffing airplane glue, paint thinner, God knows there's a zillion toxic chemicals that they'll never make illegal that people could abuse, and they will abuse in lieu of, more cultured drugs, let's say. Cannabis has vastly touched cultures around the world. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in Asia or Africa or anywhere, it's pretty universal. But there's different forms of it. The cannabis that you've got in Afghanistan might look very different than the cannabis you got in the Congo. Totally different appearance of plants, totally different flavors, totally different feelings, but also one bred for sifting for hash, for dry sifting hash, the other one bred to grow in a jungle. So these are they've evolved so differently. Before Coca-Cola, there was cannabis. It was all over the world and used in many, many cultures. And you could find people using a bamboo bong in Thailand or a hookah in Afghanistan with very different plants. The Thai plants and the Afghan plants look nothing alike. They don't smell alike. They don't taste alike. And they even create a different feeling, but one wouldn't grow necessarily where the other one does. They've
Yes.
evolved so separately that they're very, very different plants. And the Afghan ones bred for the sifting of hash, and those plants have evolved in a shape to conserve water because they're desert plants and they've got broad leaves to catch lots of rain, and they've got buds that are tight and hold their moisture in basically, so they conserve what little water they can get, and they're definitely desert cannabis. And then when you get to the tropics, like Thailand or the Congo or something, they have very thin, long flowers, very thin leaves, and the rain just goes right through them, and the wind whips through them, and they dry out in 10 minutes because they're so thin and wispy that it just takes a light breeze to dry them off. But they might get rained on for half an hour every day. Yeah, it's pretty universal herb, the international herb.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
I was going to ask about the trials on cannabis with helping Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yeah, I've read that too. Something about that it breaks down the plaque. That the Alzheimer's is a plaque in the, I guess, that builds up, and supposedly cannabis helps dissolve that. I read about it, but I don't know anything beyond that. That's I always think of this funny old thing I heard, I can't even remember where, but it said cannabis is the most potent drug in the world. And you say, why is that? Say, it's been known to cause insanity in non-users. It can cause insanity in non-users. That's pretty bad, right? These people that hate on it, that have no reason to hate on it.
Yeah.
It drives them crazy, but we like it. It doesn't, what I do in my back porch really doesn't affect them. But if they want you to be in jail for it, that's crazy, you know? And people say, you have to respect other people's opinions. I'm like, no, people have crazy opinions. So you don't have to respect people's politics. They're different than you. They have different politics. I don't want to put them in a cage because they don't like oregano. That's like crazy. You think you're allergic to cilantro? You got to eat cilantro. I don't want to put them in a cage because they can't eat cilantro. It doesn't make sense. That's just madness. So the entitlement of half of society that went along with prohibition all this time and thinks, I don't like the smell of weed, those people should be in jail.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Who was saying that a lot of the time, the people who aren't in danger are the ones who follow orders. The people who actually have an opinion are the ones who, where it is a little bit more, which is slightly different to control, isn't it? It's
the nail that sticks out gets hammered.
But cannabis as a culture doesn't stick out. So why does it get hammered so much?
I think it's because they're easy targets. They're not, if they're going after some crack dealers that have guns, they would rather get some hippies that have a pipe, they're just easy targets. You're going after people that by and large aren't, really part of the overall criminal element, let's say. Like they're outside the law, but they're not full-time gangsters. They're just growing some herb, So those people, I think it's less risk for the cops than going after real criminals that might shoot back, and are not going to go quietly, They want people that are going to go quietly, plead guilty, make their lives easy, and quick and easy bus. And it's super easy for them to, show that they can bust lots of people if cannabis is around, because, a huge amount of the population uses cannabis, and it's usually disproportionately applied to ethnic minorities as well, so that they have way more, the darker you are, the more likely you are to have been busted for it, Whereas, so it's really applied unevenly throughout the world, I think there's a lot of that. But I mean, it doesn't matter. Every culture that has cannabis and every culture has an anti-cannabis element, Like you go to Thailand, there's lots of Thais absolutely love cannabis. It's been part of their history for thousands of years. They have 17 preparations of it in Thai traditional medicine, the TTM. They have a huge history of it as a ingredient in food. You don't make chicken soup without a handful of leaves in it, so it's really, really part of their ancient culture. But then, since they've had prohibition, it got really harsh, like in certain amounts might get you a death penalty or something. Like, even though it was really a heart of cannabis, but it really cracked down on it. And it's very unfortunate, how much damage they did to people's lives over herb that was of such low quality that it probably wouldn't even catch me a buzz. We call those low grade, bushweed bricks and stuff. Maybe not to say it was all that way. Some of it be excellent too, but there's lots that's not that good. And we call it hippie hay, And you're thinking it's just like it's almost like a tobacco substitute. It's just such light cannabis that you're just smoking it for the sake of smoking something, but it's not even really having a lot of effect on you necessarily. But as Thailand was kind of the first to turn a corner on it. And that was like 2.5 years ago. Before that, they had added a hemp program and then started doing some medical research plans that you could only really grow THC cannabis in Thailand if you were military or a hospital, basically. So, and then they were the only ones that could get processing licenses as well. But we started out 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, maybe, with the hemp license there. And I knew there wasn't going to be a big, a successful market in hemp because it have to be bred for the lowlands where the farm was. And that's not conducive land. Even if you have climatized hemp, the entire plains of Thailand are carved up into very small lots of rice. So they have like berms around them so you can walk between the rice paddies and stuff. So in the dry season, you can grow cannabis in the land there, but if it rains early or something, the little patch will get flooded because there's no drainage and you'll drown. I've seen fields of wheat drown there because the rains came 2 weeks early and wiped out the crops, So but it's mainly that it's just too small. And hemp crops can be done with mechanized agriculture on an industrial scale. And there's no room for boutique hemp farming. And that's kind of what they were trying to pitch to the Thai farmers. Well, you can all be little half-acre hemp farmers. No, you can't all be little half-acre hemp farmers. And also they have really high security requirements when we got the hemp license. So we had to have cameras and fences and everything. And then when June came around 2.5 years ago, and they descheduled the plant, so it was no longer an illegal plant. So the plant itself, they still were trying to control numbers for households, but if we had a hemp license and we'd asked the inspector even before because we were pushing him to get a genetics research license. And the last time he came to see us was maybe 3 months when it was being gazetted as a 90-day gazette or something before it became law. And he says, "Oh, don't worry about applying. Just plant whatever you want. I don't think I'll be back. I got to be looking for a new job." Because they just said we don't need cannabis inspectors to go look at these farms anymore. And it was so refreshing though, because you could drive down the highway in the cities and there'd be grandma and grandpa set up with a couple hundred plants at the side of the road, some in, small pots, some in beer cups, and they would just be standing there selling plants in the traffic to everybody driving through. Just like they were selling oranges or something, right? So that's what I'd love to see, is just to absolutely normalize it and let everybody play. Not just sell it out to some big companies that have connections with the politicians, right? Just too often the way it goes. And, or it's just the barrier of entry is just too high for people. And it's still in a lot of places, it is like that, like insane in the States. I recently been putting together a spreadsheet to compare because I'm always looking at the viability of different places for new projects. And so I was making a spreadsheet of all the U.S. factors, or the factors that apply to each U.S. state. And the craziest one, in a way, the most expensive by far was New York State. There's $200,000 to apply for a grow license, $200,000 to apply as a processing license, $200,000 to apply as a dispensary. So if you wanted to do all three and then have your own product in your own dispensary, $600,000 a year. A, to apply, and B, same price to renew it every year. Like, that's what industry do they do that to? It doesn't matter if you want to open a cigar shop, they're not going to do that to you, You want to sell wine, they're not going to do that to you. But they just treat us like second-class citizens. That the cannabis industry people are just there to be exploited is literally the government's view of us, It's really brutal. So I pick and choose, It used to be, when I started Spice of Life was in Vancouver in the mid-90s. And then I had a chance to go to Switzerland. And then I was there on a 2-week consulting job, and I could see, wow, this is exactly what I've always wanted, where you can just do it wide open and it's normal and there's no licenses. And there was nowhere else you couldn't get licenses. There wasn't even a thing anywhere. So it was just, I'm going to go over there and set it up. And it's no different than if I was breeding tomatoes. No registration, no extra fees. There's still like for the warehouse, you'd have to have an electrical inspector sign off, but you would for any business, But there was nothing to punish you for being in the cannabis industry. Whereas it's punitive taxation in Canada. So I've just refused to participate. I'm happy that homegrown's legal, at least partially. You're not as many flavors as you'd like necessarily, but you're allowed to have 4 plants, which is 4 better than 0. But, and nobody's coming to count if you've got 7 or 8 either. So but it's still just, nanny state stuff that kind of bothers me. Anyway, they charge $1 a seed excise. Can you imagine that? You know what they charge on poppy seeds? Nothing. You know what they charge on tobacco seeds? Nothing. $1 a seed. A kilo has on average 50,000-60,000 seeds. So if you want to package up a kilo, you have to buy your excise stamps before you sell the product. Just at the point of packaging is when you pay it. So I'm like, well, geez, if I want to grow 10 different kilos of seeds and put them on the market, I'm going to pay $500,000 before just at the day I package it. It's not worth it. I would rather just work somewhere else, because it's just irrational. There's nowhere in the world they tax per cannabis seed. Canada treats its cannabis culture like absolute muppets. And really, a lot of the people that got in the industry, they hadn't grown before, and it was their big chance. I'm finally going to get to grow, and they're all excited because they just didn't have the fortitude to always do it. So you get a have flooded into the industry because these are the ones that didn't have the moral conviction to do it when they weren't allowed to do it. They've only grown when they've been able to pay for a license to do it. And to me, we're not cut from the same cloth at some level. And there's some old timers, of course, that came from the old days into the modern times. But most of them that I've chatted with are kind of regretting it, that they're like, it's impossible. All the margin is swallowed up by the tax. We can't make any money. And at some level, black market's going to kick in when the taxes are too high. So in Canada, there's still lots of black market cannabis available, although the legal consumption has gone up and up. But overall, it's sort of plateaued, I think, and there's still the black market kind of stubbornly held in there. And that's mainly for the people that are really regular users, because I think they say 99% of cannabis is consumed by 1% of the cannabis users. So it's the chronic users that use all the cannabis. The people that use a little bit every other weekend, they barely touch the totals, It's the guys that smoke 10 big joints every day that consume it. And they can't go and pay the by the gram price in the stores with the huge tax markups on them. They want to buy it in bulk. Like if you buy a bottle of wine, is one thing. You buy a case of wine, sometimes they give you 15% off or something, right? So they want to get bulk discounts because they use it, but they don't get a bulk discount from the legal shops. So they're sort of locked into paying, really total retail for good. And even then, the prices come down. Canadian companies, a lot of them have been selling cannabis less than the cost of production, because Canada's been producing 10 times more than it consumes every year for quite a few years. So it's been trying to export the excess, but eventually it becomes so old and stale that even then they have to burn it, write it off. But so they're dumping it on the market to get rid of it for a tenth of the cost of production. If it cost them $1.50 a gram to grow that indoor, they're selling it for 15 cents a gram to get rid of it wholesale. Yeah. So there's a lot of that gets shipped to other countries, and the locals in there, like Israel just slapped a huge tariff on Canadian cannabis because we've been dumping it over there cheaper than they can grow it. But Canada just had a head start, and it was such a bubble because it was the first public companies anybody could invest in. So tons of money flooded into the sector when it was first legalized. And then it just blew up in their faces because they're all selling their story of funded capacity. Oh,
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
it's 1 million kilos get consumed in Canada every year. But when you add up the extracts and tinctures, so that's 1,000 tons a year, right? So if you've got 20 companies that can grow that, or even if they're growing less, but you've got a bunch that can, a bunch less, they're growing 10 times what they can sell. So it has to give. Somewhere they're going to have to get rid of it, right? So I know one of the only companies making money in Australia, the guy in charge there was importing cheap Canadian weed, and they would sell it as the cheapest weed in Australia. And that was just their niche. They say, we don't care, if it's really the best of the best. What we really care about is the price. And if it's absolutely astronomically low, we'll take it. So that was really that's their only concern by it, is strictly price. How cheap can we get it? What's the cheapest weed available in the country today? We'll take it. And there's a bunch of that going to even Europe and the Middle East and South Africa. The South African market's really quite large and taken off. So I know a lot of people that have either gone to set up dispensaries there, or they're doing medical importing, because again, they can import the Canadian stuff lower than the cost of production. So that's something that Canada won't have forever, because like if the US goes to Schedule 3, which they're talking about, isn't ideal. Nobody in the cannabis community is going, we want Schedule 3. Nobody. It's purely a gift to the pharmaceutical companies. But you have to game it out. What happens if that's what happens, So you have to game it out and say, what are the implications here? Are there opportunities? Or is it, better to stay out? It's going to be too much. Who knows? But I think the thing that it will do is allow American companies to export, because currently they can't legally export. You can buy American weed in Europe and American weed in South America and in Thailand and Vietnam. Lots of excess American weed is getting exported now. And it's really kind of funny, because you think in the old days, Thai weed was getting imported to the West Coast. Now it's the West Coast weed being imported to Thailand. And the Thais are up in arms about all this Californian weed coming in, and we can't compete with it because it's too good, and people just want to buy the Californian weed. It's like, hey, well, you never complained when you were putting Thai weed in California. But anyway, the Schedule 3 would let foreign companies potentially export, product into the U.S., like pharmaceutical type product at least, So that could open up some opportunities for foreign producers, but at the same time, they'll have to compete with American producers that they don't now, right? So there's different considerations. Also, I think if it's Schedule 3, it's federal, so that in every state you could potentially legally possess some, which now you can't, right? So there's still a lot of states you can't legally possess any. So at least from the point of view for possession, at least it could be an upside there. It might, you're going to try and take it as a half step win. It is not the full step you were looking for, but it's totally possible, if not probable, that Schedule 3 will happen. But what we all want is deschedule. Just simply deschedule. It doesn't deserve to be up there, So that's the right thing to do, is to deschedule. But if Schedule 3 comes, which is a distinct possibility, what's the upsides and what are the downsides? It can't all be bad, right? There's got to be some upsides. And that's, people get mad at me for saying that, because they're like, just go with a big company. It's like, I don't care. Anybody that thinks there's not going to be big cannabis is delusional. Just like there's big alcohol and big tobacco and big pharma, you don't get a lot of boutique pharma. There might be a little bit. There is boutique beer. You've got craft beer and you've got big industrial beer, And that's probably more what it'll be like, where you're going to have some craft cannabis, but you're still going to have the Coors Light, or Budweiser. There's going to be big brands that are international. They're going to be the Heineken of herb, So if you think that's not going to happen, you're kidding yourself. That will happen. And it sounds far-fetched to a lot of people, I think, and lots of people say, oh my God, you wouldn't want to have some mass market cannabis that's available everywhere. I'll say, well, you would if you put it together, you would, because I would argue with people in Canada when there was kind of online debates ongoing online, of course, when Canada was looking at various versions of what the regs could look like with adult use being legalized. And one of them was people, there was questionnaires from Health Canada, and they were saying, would you like cannabis to be in standalone shops or also available in liquor stores? So I would say both is better than standalone. But these people would say, my God, oh, you can't have it in liquor stores because what if you're a stoner because you quit drinking and you can't go into a liquor store to buy your, like, okay, I'm not against standalone shops and you should be able to go to one, but I want to see it in all the shops. I want to see it at the gas station, or at the pharmacy or anywhere for different formats or different places, whatever. I want to get it at the end of my dinner. They bring out my port after dinner with a bowl of hash at the restaurant. But people that didn't want it to be in liquor stores, I just thought they were so stupid because if you want to convert people that are maybe drinking now, give them the option at the checkout of grabbing some gummies to go with that case of vodka. You win more converts there. Plus, I like infused alcohols. So you can make creme de menthe without the menthe. You substitute any cannabis flavor you want, so you could have creme de blockhead or creme de shiskerberry, you know, and they taste like it. So you wait. A friend of mine once said, a long time ago, he said, the way to the straight people's hearts is through their bottles. So it's true. If you start having, even wines, you've got, what's that wine? Vermouth, that's all herbs in the wine, right? So, I mean, herbal wine's a thing. And of course, I've played with making a few myself and I've totally enjoyed that. I'd like to be able to drink some cannabis. If you can have Jägermeister where every shot has 5 mils in it of THC, that's really easy to titrate. So I can't have more than 4 shots or whatever, that's 20, I'll be good, so, but people didn't want it to be mixed with alcohol. I just thought it was very short-sighted because it's a great way to bridge the gap. So you can buy infused beverages, but they don't have alcohol. You can buy alcohol beverages or cannabis beverages, but heaven forbid, they were the same. So it
Where
doesn't
do you
mean
think vape sit in all of this? Is vape kind of an introduction to somebody being able to...
That can be good. A clean vape pouch that have, either quality solventless extracts or quality solvent extracts. But if they're, what I don't like is when they have artificial flavorings and stuff. And a lot of the vapes in the shops, they're putting kind of like menthol cigarettes, it's like, okay, well,
It's a
you know what I mean? It's just kind of gross, so I see
chewing
them.
gum and a cigarette.
Yeah, you see all the time this like artificially flavored. They're doing it in joints now too in Canada. And that the reason is because these companies can't make any money selling real cannabis. The only thing they can do is break up shitty, cheap cannabis or all the leaves on the floor. They sweep up garbage bags of leaves, and then they spray it with distillate and artificial flavors. And then they call it an infused joint. And they sell them as pre-rolls and people smoke them like, well, it really does taste like papaya. It's like, well, yeah, too much. Tastes a little too much. It's like artificial papaya flavor. And it might be high THC because they've just sprayed 90% distillate on it, So they dissolve that and then spray it on. So they're really like becoming like Frankenweed, almost it's like really terrible joints where they I can't believe the crap they get away with selling, honestly. I really can't believe it. And there's no quality control in the regulations, which would be about the only sensible thing they could do in them is they might control things like microbial content, but they're not controlling additives, not really. Like you can add artificial flavoring to weed. If you can't do that to wine, I shouldn't say you can't, but you're not supposed to. So it's just become, to me, what I kind of dreaded was like the ugly side of legalization would be that, seriously dumbing down the quality for people that just don't know better. Like making really good hash, there's no shortcut. It's either there or it's not. You can't fake it. With oil, you can start to fake it. So with vapes, they can have additives more so than a flower or hash could, But I say that now, but now they're doing flavored hash and flavored flower, which I was gifted some, and people said, "What did you think of this?" What do you think? Like, "Fucking, this is gross. What is it?" They're like, "Oh, they flavor it up." I'm like, do they ever? Like, it doesn't taste natural. So it's kind of, off-putting to me. If you're somewhat of a cannabis purist, you'll be off-put by what's going on under the guise of the legal market. Like if you tried to sell that on the black market, you'd get punched in the nose. You know, but they can hide it because you can't see what's in the joint, and you can't even see what's in the packaging because it's got to be black. And you can't be transparent. Let's say, so they're buying it sight unseen. They're buying it without getting to smell it first or anything. It's sealed up. When you get home and open it, and you're like, "Holy hell! What the? This smells like a candy shop or something." Like, but not in a good way. Like in a plastic way. It's what we get. That's just part of legalization, and I don't mind anybody selling anything as long as people know what they're getting, but if they can't see it or smell it or anything first, then yeah, they might be surprised when they get home and open it up and might be disappointed, and understandably so. So it would be really nice if, like a lot of places used to have even unpackaged cannabis. They would just have like jars of it where they would dispense it with toothpicks. But you would look at the jar, you could smell the jar, and then say, "Yeah, I want those buds there." And they would pick them out for you and weigh them and put them in your little bag and seal it up for you. I like that better for people, if you're going into a store. I can appreciate having a packaged brand, even if you can't see through it. Like when you go to buy a pack of cigarettes, they all look the same now. Like they're all brown packs with the warnings on them and all that. But it's the brand. You're looking for your Dunhills or your Rothmans or whatever, right? So people become attached to their brand even without all the logos and everything and without being able to see the product. So there's a lot to be said for, building your brand and having quality in there that you believe and value, because quality alone is important. But if you can do quality and value, then you can really win a lot of hearts and minds. There's it's actually just the scope of the cannabis market is really hard to comprehend because it is so spread across society in all societies, basically, It's only getting more popular, and the prohibition has only made it more popular. It would never be as popular as it is were it not for prohibition. And then, you think of all the famous artists that ever used it, and claimed inspiration. It's just ingrained in the culture. So by putting it on the top shelf and saying, "You can't go up and have those," everybody's going to try and climb up and get them, because they know it's low.
During COVID, I was wondering if during that period there was a massive...
There was an explosion in cannabis use because people were trapped at home or not going out to bars, and they're like, "Oh, we might as well get some cannabis and watch a movie and take it easy at home because there's nothing else to do." So
there were more new users or new people being introduced to cannabis culture during that time.
I don't know. I mean, I think in Canada, at least, it kind of coincided pretty closely, not exactly, but pretty closely with legalization. So I know there was definitely some people were sitting on the fence about using it until it was legal. They said, "Well, I'll try it when it's legal," Okay, well, I think a quarter of the country already used it. But once they legalized it, there were still some people that are like, yeah, I'll try it once it's legal, but maybe they hadn't got around to it. But when there was COVID and they were stuck at home, it's just kind of a light amusement for people say, oh, well, I guess I'll get high and watch TikTok or whatever. It was pretty recently legal. And the first version of legalization, they didn't have anything except flower, basically. There was no edibles or extracts. So the vape carts and that came later in Canada anyway, But a lot of people, I think, really like the vape carts because they're very soft and they're very discreet. And if they have quality product in them, they're very enjoyable. I fill my own cart sometimes, and just to have some, and I like it, like even just to have some at the bedside. Like I might have 3 or 4 flavors of them that I've made myself sitting at my bedside table. And I don't smoke in my room, I don't smoke in the house at all. I go outside if I'm going to smoke something. But if I'm going to dab a concentrate, I don't mind doing that in the house because it doesn't leave a smell like combustion of plant material, You're just inhaling the vapor of the essence of the plant, but it doesn't smell like burning weed, It doesn't smell like that burning rope smell that the fiber has, right? So, but, and I live in a house with non-smokers too, so it doesn't offend them. They kind of like the smell of the essence of it. Oh, that smells nice. But they don't, if I smoked a joint, they'd be like, oh, I just smoke it and stink up the place, So it's easy for me to go outside if I want to smoke a joint. But if I'm, dabbing / vaping, I can do that inside and it just smells nice in the house. And it dissipates pretty quick. It's not like you smell it the next day in the room, like stale cigarettes or something. It really just dissipates. And, I really love the smells of certain cannabis, and I can't stand the smells of certain cannabis. Like it's really so complex. I think there's 200 times more volatile aromatics in cannabis than wine. There's a huge number. There's just layers and layers of complexity in that, depending on what it is and how well it's done, how well it's cured. But some of them have like an eye-watering evergreen smell, and some of them might smell exactly like lemons, and other ones might smell like bleach, ones that smell like onions and ones that smell like carrots and strawberries and grapefruits and mangoes. And there's so many different aromatic profiles that come out, and they're often more than one. Like it might smell like citrus, but also like rosemary.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
I was wondering if they were complemented growths. So would there have been particular plants within the environment? Or is
both.
it just
both. It's genetic and environment. And one perfect example of this was a friend from Oregon I'd met him once in Vancouver. This was in the 90s. And then the next time we were getting together in Vancouver, he was just smoking mine, of course, because he couldn't travel up easily with it. But we met in Amsterdam for the Cannabis Cup, and that was maybe in 96 or 97 or something. And he'd mailed over some samples of his flowers from Oregon. And I remember going to puff one of them and wondering the smell and the taste. To me, I was like, it absolutely tastes like beets. And he just dropped his shit and said, I grew that in the beets, So their roots are touching beets, So it picks up from what it's around, right? So it's a terroir sponge. Cannabis is same as grapes for wines. It's a terroir sponge. And the first time I really met this one guy in Ottawa that was selling some flower, because I didn't want to sell the flower I'd grown because it was irreplaceable. So a friend of a friend came by with a backpack with this weed in it, and he came into my apartment, and he hadn't even opened the backpack. He just sat down at the couch with the backpack in front of him. And I said, did you grow that in fish emulsion? And he hadn't taken it out of the backpack yet. It was still bagged up in the backpack. I said, did you grow with fish emulsion? Because I can't stand the smell of fish emulsion and weed. And it really comes through. I love growing aquaponics with live fish, and the water and the waste from the fish pond is absolutely fantastic. But when you use fish emulsion, you give that like dead fish smell to the weed. I could smell it before he took it out of his bag. And when I asked him, do you grow it with fish emulsion? He said, he was like, literally his jaw just hit the floor. And then he was like, my brother and I grow this. When we fish in the summer, every time we catch a sucker, we just leave it on the ground to die. And then we put a sucker in the bottom of every hole for fertilizer. So he's like, every plant we grow is growing out a fish. It's like, it smells like it. Like, it looks like nice bud. But he said, but what's with you? Because he says, everybody I show this bud to, they're just like, wow, frosty and green. It looks really nice. And that's all they say. The first guy that ever complained about it. I'm sure most people don't mind it. But to me, I've, one down tried using fish emulsion on the plant. And then when I could still smell it in the plant later, I was like, never using that again, Because it's not just about the THC level. It's about the entourage effect of all the other things in there that affect the type of high you're going to have. I think of the cannabis, like the THC level as the volume, So you've got, lots of variables because you've got different cannabinoids and those will affect the feel, but you've also got the terps. So you've kind of got a range of things to look at as far as the chemotypes. And people find ones that they gravitate to. And certainly this one of my earliest ones, which is my longest living cultivar as a live plant, is from, I think I crossed the parents in the fall of 95 and harvested the seed at the beginning of 96 and grew it out right away and made the selections. And that cutting from 96 is still around. And that's my original sweet skunk. And that is, a slower plant than most people want to grow now. It's maybe 11, 12 weeks, and most people are looking for 8 or 9. And it's not a fashionable looking grass. It's not tight nugs. It's very loose spears. But it smells so good, and it's always been the ladies' favorite. So I've had friends that are totally into cannabis, have hundreds of flavors at home. It's the only one their wife will smoke, So women love that weed. That weed, if I had to pick one for the ladies' night, I would say, here, ladies, take this, because I know it's one that they love and just, they love it. There's no other way to put it.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
If somebody did want to find out a little bit more about yourself.
I set up a website about 8 years ago, just a very basic one called breedersteve.com. And then just this week, I'm putting up a new version of it. Also a Spice of Life cannabis, because we want to go beyond seed to selling Spice of Life cannabis through licensing agreements in various places. But in the U.S., all of my seed is entering through Stars and Stripes seed. So starsandstripesseed.com is where everything I'm doing will drop first in the US, at least, and then we're the same partners. We're going to have another European edition. We can find our seeds through Europe to be available wholesale from the Netherlands, but not for sale in the Netherlands. So that's we've set up a Dutch company that can import the seeds legally. So we can get phytosanitary certificates and bring in seeds from Colombia or Thailand or other places where I might be making them. And as long as they enter Holland with all the correct paperwork there, that's fine, but they have to be sold onwards from Holland. We can't sell them in Holland, which is too bad, because we did want to set up a shop maybe there where we could meet people in person and have a nice little place to hang out with people to talk seeds. But that's got to take a back seat for now. But at least they will soon be available to growers that are allowed to get seeds throughout Europe, So I'm excited about that. Yeah, there's some really fun things happening with supplying for Stars and Stripes, because I wanted to have a place where all my stuff could drop and where I could park it on consignment if I wanted to go traveling, and know they could just dip into it and have the, real-time inventory tracking and payments and everything set up. So Tarek's done a great job setting all that up. It's fantastic. And I've got collaboration started with one friend who's got a farm in Morocco, but he also lives in Nepal. So we're doing collecting seeds from Nepal and collecting some classic Moroccan, but we're also going to develop new ones in Morocco, probably mostly for the Moroccan market, and grow seed there in the off season in greenhouses. So that's been exciting to get that started. And then I have another project just starting now in Ghana, which is, in West Africa. And that's on the banks of the Volta River with 1,000 acres or 400 hectares. And we're going to get to work on a seed breeding project there, but also we'll start doing a medical production, perhaps for export to the UK. So that's still,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So
We'll have to include all the links in
yeah, we
the
can
notes
do that.
below.
We can do that. And also the cool thing with Stars and Stripes is I thought once we'd set that up, and that's, I can get my first stuff out there, but that's not very much stuff. So I wanted to place for other breeders who were, dabbling in breeding, just like I started out, and just said, hey, it's fun to do a little breeding, but, it's a whole other thing to manage the website and the social media and set up the payment channels and all that stuff. So to have the infrastructure we have set up and made it available to independent breeders, so any other breeders, unless there's like a lot of complaints and bad reputations or something, but overall, anybody that wants to start selling their seeds in the US is welcome to use our site. And we have a consignment model. And I think we've had about 45 independent breeders sign up. They haven't all uploaded anything yet to sell, but it's great to see the community growing. And as it's growing, I'm expanding this million seed search idea I'd had long ago, which was to use contributed seeds to scope out new stuff in all these different environments. And of course, whatever I want to use, I'll keep and use, but mostly I just want to see everything and compare it to each other. And as a seed reseller, Stars and Stripes Seed is the only one that's literally going to be running test fields of all the seeds on the site, because most of the seed banks, they're strictly an online operation. They'll never sow a field of seeds to show you everything on their catalog. But we're doing it in multiple locations. So we've got 4 sites in Jamaica, a couple sites in Ghana, and in Thailand. In Thailand, we can't import the seeds unless they're seeds with paperwork, so we have held off doing one there. But from stuff we acquire within Thailand, we can do test crops there. So we've tested a few hundred types in Thailand over the last few years. But the next biggest one to visit, all the contributors to it, or anybody in the industry wants to get an invite, message me about it somewhere, and we can get you over there. But the next one will be in the coming year in Ghana, and we'll lay out really, really an amazing selection of plants to look at in the dry season when most things you can finish. In Ghana, we're at 2 degrees off the equator, 2 degrees north. So it's really, really equatorial. It's 12-12 all the time. And a lot of people think, well, you can't grow modern hybrids that are bred for indoor in the tropics. And to a large degree, that's true. Most of them will fail, especially in the shoulder season or the wet season. But in the dry season, just about everything works, in my experience. That I've grown the closest to the equator I've grown is like 3.4 degrees. And in the dry season, almost everything would finish, and finish really well, like incredibly well. So I'm really hooked on equatorial growing. Most growers in the developed world are pretty focused on indoor or maybe greenhouse if they're commercially minded, but most of them just think about indoor. And outdoors, it's almost got a bad rap because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy when people go, oh, it's just outdoor. So they don't really, they drag it through the field instead of cutting the flowers and putting them nicely in boxes standing up. If you treat your outdoor the same as you treat your indoor, it ends up looking a lot better. But if you just pile up the plants in the back of the pickup truck and they all get all smushed together, it starts to look like crap just because it gets lesser attention to detail, really, but it can be the best. An outdoor can be the best, and it depends lots of factors. But to me, the most I've ever enjoyed cannabis a few times in my life has been outdoors.
Steve, I could talk to you for hours about this.
I'm sure you will.
And I'm looking forward to it. Just for today, I was wondering if I could thank you so much.
Sure.
And we would love to stay in touch with you and learn more about your incredible work.
Well, thank you very much.
And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And we'll keep you updated on our upcoming episode with Breeder Steve. And hopefully we'll be the first to know about the new strain releases.
Well, have a great day and a great night. Sleep tight.
Thank you so much. And don't forget to subscribe. Is there a subscription, Steve, for newsletters or anything with your...
On breedersteve.com, there is a newsletter sign up. Yeah. Super.
Until next time, to everybody listening, let's keep growing.
All right. Have a great night. Thanks for coming out, folks.
Speak to you soon. Bye.
Likewise.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.